Colleagues, we're waiting. We're ready to start. Please take your seats.
Good afternoon, folks. We're going to start the session. Please take your seats.
Yeah, just tell one to get it.
We're going to pick up with the working program. Next up for discussion is agenda item 33.8, application of Article 13 in the European Union. And as announced yesterday, we will also be taking 33.1 and the potential case for the United Kingdom, taking them together since they are similar. And so I will turn the floor over to the Secretariat to introduce both of the documents.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon to all. As explained by the Chair, we are going to discuss first the case of the EU, followed by the case of the United Kingdom. So I'm introducing document 33.8 on the application of Article 13 in the European Union, and then I will introduce after paragraph 6 to 14 and the recommendations that are in document 33.1. concerning the United Kingdom. As you remember, at the 74th meeting of the Standing Committee, these cases were reviewed under Article 13 concerning the registration of operations that bred Appendix 1 animal species in captivity for commercial purposes. And the committee agreed that the Secretariat shall continue to keep close communication and strengthen the cooperation with the EU and its member states and with the United Kingdom regarding these cases and seek invitations to provide in-country assistance, conduct technical assessments and verification missions to several selected operations to know the type of trade controls that are put in place to verify the legal origin of the parental stock and the commercial or non-commercial nature of those operations. On 14 June 2022, the Secretariat sent a letter to the Management Authority of the EU requesting information with regard to operations breeding bird and reptile species listed in Appendix 1. The Secretariat also requested that the EU consider issuing an invitation to undertake a technical assessment and verification mission to several selected breeding facilities in Germany and Spain, to verify how the CITES authorities determine whether or not the animals are being bred or for commercial purposes. The European Union replied on 15 September 2022, and an invitation was received from the authorities of Germany and Spain to visit their countries. The Secretariat conducted technical missions to Germany from 4 to 6 October and to Spain from 19 to 22nd October, right before COP19. Field visits were made to captive breeding facilities in Brandenburg, ACTP, and Mundershausen. Apologies for my bad German. Reptile 24 in Germany, and to Masquefa, Tortuland, Cubeles, Parogri, and Denia radiatas paradise in Spain. The responses to those questions that we sent to the European Union and the observations made during these visits are summarized in the present document. The Secretariat would like to express its appreciation to the EU and to Germany and Spain for the openness, transparency, and technical and logistical support provided in planning and coordinating these visits. The hospitality offered to the Secretariat during the missions was also highly appreciated. One of the key elements of the discussion was the distinction between commercial versus hobby breeding, and German authorities considered that it might be useful to develop a workable definition of commercial breeding that excludes hobby breeders and includes all commercial breeders. The Management Authority of Germany further suggested that it might be helpful to explicitly exclude hobby breeders from the expectation to proceed through the current registration procedure as set out in Resolution Conf 12.10, Rev Cop 15. A difficulty is how to define hobby breeder in a way that is meaningful and can be implemented in the domestic context of all parties and in a way that is applicable to all species relevant for captive breeding. The specific case of the import of two specimens of Amazona imperialis and the 10 specimens of Amazona arausica from Dominica to Germany on 2018 by ACTP is explained in paragraph 48 to 52 of the present document. During the technical mission to Spain, the Management Authority informed the Secretariat that there are approximately 3,000 registered breeders in Spain, breeding mainly Falconiformes and Psittacidae. Spain also expressed interest in ensuring that breeders of Appendix 1 species fulfill all CITES requirements and more, as the EU and Spain have stricter domestic measures in place. However, it was unclear to the authorities how to implement the requirement mentioned in paragraph 5J of Resolution Conf 12.10. Regarding the interpretation of the term primarily commercial purposes, the preamble of the resolution recognizes that because this is not defined in the convention, it can be interpreted by the parties in different ways. The resolution further acknowledges that the facts concerning each import will determine whether a proposed use will be for primarily commercial purposes or not. Additionally, the resolution provides general principles and examples to guide the parties in assessing the commercial elements of the intended use. On the basis of the elements gathered during the technical missions and this brief analysis, the Secretariat has formulated some recommendations for the consideration of the Standing Committee. The most fundamental consideration is the actual degree of commerciality of the transactions and the fact that some captive bred specimens are not used for scientific research. The fact is that specimens are sold on the domestic market on the EU or trade internationally. In light of the text of Article 3, Paragraph 5C of the Convention and General Principle in Resolution 5.10, the Secretariat is of the opinion that a significant number of captive bred specimens found in the facilities visited during the two technical missions are traded for an intended use of a commercial nature, which suggests that they have been bred for primarily commercial purposes. Regarding the urgency of this case, which is something that we don't mention in the document, we are talking about species that are listed in Appendix 1, and mainly for parrots, we have seen in the present cases that there is an increase in the illegal trade of these specimens, which seems to validate the consent of the need to bring them to the attention of the committee. And why now? Why we are bringing this case now? Well, we think that after 20 years, this resolution was adopted in Chile in 2002. I think that this is enough time for parties to make the necessary arrangements to implement the resolution. It's clear that what we are talking about is about the implementation of Article 3 and Article 7, Paragraph 4 of the Convention in regard to the registration of operations that bred Appendix 1 animal species in captivity for commercial purposes. So the main recommendations are regarding the evidence that the parental stock had been obtained in accordance with the relevant national laws and provisions of the convention, and that the primarily commercial nature of the operations breeding appendix animal species in captivity is correct. Based on these determinations, the committee is invited to consider the recommendations made in paragraph 80 to 91, and the committee is also invited to consider the recommendation included in paragraph 80 to 90, and the committee is also invited to consider the recommendation included in paragraph 91 on the specific case of the import of 2 specimens of Amazona imperialis and the 10 specimens of Arausiaca from Dominica to Germany in 2018. Thank you, Madam Chair. This is the document on the European Union. Do you want me to continue with the paragraph relevant to the UK in
Yes,
the other
please.
document?
Yes, please.
Regarding the UK, the Secretariat recalls that this case was brought to the attention of the committee in conjunction with the case of the European Union. I'm referring to document 33.1 and to a paragraph concerning the United Kingdom. And the similar analysis that was conducted in document 33.8 can apply to the case of the United Kingdom with slight differences, as the number of facilities existing in the UK are much lower, and several of the species that are bred in captivity are originated in the UK. So the UK is the range state for this species. So that makes an important difference with the case of the European Union. Regarding the potential compliance matters related to the registration of these operations that bred Appendix 1 animal species in captivity in the United Kingdom, the Secretariat undertook a mission to the UK from 25 to 27 October last year and met with the United Kingdom CITES Management Authority, the Scientific Authority, representative of other agencies involved in the implementation and enforcement of CITES in the United Kingdom. The mission included visits to facilities breeding birds of prey which were registered in accordance with the provisions of Resolution Conf 12.10 and facilities which had not been registered. When questioned on the rationale for the lack of registration in accordance with the relevant CITES resolutions, the United Kingdom indicated that it believes its domestic regime fulfills the functions and makes adequate provision for scrutiny of those facilities. When the Secretariat inquired about whether any cases of non-compliant taking or trade in bird of prey specimens were under investigation in the United Kingdom, in connection with captive breeding facilities, the wildlife inspector from AFA indicated that a very recent case had been discovered of a captive breeding facility breeding from birds not of a legal origin. The UK may wish to provide an update on the status of that investigation. The recommendations in paragraph 48, A, B, and C contains the recommendations regarding this case and are quite similar to those formulated for the EU. So the Secretariat invites the committee to consider the recommendations for the 2 cases together. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. I will first give the floor to the European Union.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The EU and its member states would like to thank the Secretariat for the report and for the time they took to visit 2 EU member states. We appreciate the work of the Secretariat and the opportunity to outline and discuss our regulations and processes. The EU and its member states are committed to fully implementing the objectives and principles of the Convention, and we welcome constructive feedback to achieve this. We acknowledge the Secretariat's observation regarding the EU's non-registration practice of operations that breed Appendix 1 animals in captivity for commercial purposes, as prescribed by Resolution Conf 1210. We would like to add, however, that the existing legislation within the EU implementing the Convention is, in our opinion, stricter in the sense that it provides more safeguards thanks to the case-by-case assessment for every export. Therefore, when analyzing the document SC 7733.8, we feel it would be beneficial to first present a complete picture of the main principles of the system in place in the EU for export of Appendix 1 captive bred animals. The EU implements the Convention through the legislation adopted at the EU level, the so-called EU Wildlife Trade Regulations. These regulations contain all the necessary provisions to transpose the Convention at the EU level. The EU implemented all elements of Resolution 10.16, Ref COP 19, on specimens of animal species bred in captivity, which is the basis for allowing trade in listed captive bred animals. The rules in the EU are based on the same understanding as the one by the Secretariat on commercial purposes, as well as provisions to ensure legal acquisition of parental stock for captive bred animals, in line also with the Resolution 18.7, Ref COP 19, on legal acquisition findings. We would kindly like to refer to Article 54 of the Commission Regulation 865/2006, which sets out all criteria. We would like to stress that the fact of having embedded every element of the resolution in the EU legislation guarantees a uniform application across the EU member states. As indicated in the EU's reply of September 2022 to the Secretariat, in accordance with the EU Wildlife Trade Regulations, a case-by-case assessment is warranted for every export of specimens of Appendix 1 species. This assessment, carried out by the competent EU member states management authority in consultation with the competent scientific authority, includes systematic checks on whether the specimen is captive bred in accordance with the requirements of Resolution Conf 10.16, as well as an assessment of the legal origin. The implementing EU regulation fully ensures the application of the Resolution 10.16 in the EU through its extensive requirements, including the criteria to verify if the specimens meet the definition of born and bred in captivity. To ensure full compliance with the Convention, the EU scrutinizes every individual export for commercial trade on a case-by-case basis, ensuring a high level of control. In our opinion, this is a stricter approach as compared to an upfront assessment of a breeding operation in the context of the registration procedure, which is then followed by issuing export permits or breeding certificates without an individual assessment whether the requirements of captive breeding have been met. Furthermore, beyond established legislation, additional guidance has been adopted at the EU level to help EU member states and stakeholders to implement the EU Wildlife Trade Regulations in relation to live animal species, specimens born and bred in captivity. The guidance instructs over elements such as the establishment of breeding stocks for captive breeding, verification of legal origin of founder stocks that are non-detrimental to wild specimens, determination of source cost, and specific roles of scientific authorities and management authorities. In addition, export applications for Appendix 1 specimens, which already have an EU certificate, are subject to additional checks based on several risk factors. For instance, a sudden increase in productivity from the relevant facility, a high volume of trade in specimens that are difficult to breed, or the export is for a species that is not easy to breed to second generation, etc. The guidance also contains detailed instructions for verifying legal acquisition. All in all, the EU system faithfully integrates the above-mentioned Resolution Conf 10.16, Ref COP 19, and Resolution Conf 18.7, Ref COP 19, in combination with a case-by-case approach, which is, to some degree, stricter than the measures foreseen under Resolution Conf 12.10. every application for export of captive bred animals is examined individually by the management authorities of the EU member states. It is important to distinguish between assessing the legal system in the EU and its member states and specific cases identified by the Secretariat or exports of particular species. We feel that the document 33.8 does not clearly make that distinction. When it comes to specific facilities, the Secretariat does not detail how they arrived at certain conclusions. For example, as to why the parental stock of the visited facilities would not be obtained in accordance with relevant national legislation and the Convention. We are ready to follow up with the Secretariat on the cases they identified. Following this, we consider that the report does not provide sufficient details about how the Secretariat came to the general conclusion described in paragraph 87.a. When it comes to the system in place in the EU, we would like to highlight the following points for your consideration. As concerns Resolution 12.10, as expressed in the EU's reply of September 2022, the EU considered that its practice outlined before offers a similar degree of guarantees. Moreover, as stated in Resolution 12.10, the determination of whether to apply the exemptions in Article 7, Paragraph 4, for the export of specimens of Appendix 1 animals bred in captivity for commercial purposes remains the responsibility of the management authority of the exporting party on the advice of the scientific authority that each operation complies with the provisions of Resolution Conf 10.6. The EU considers that its system of systematic checks to thoroughly assess the conditions are met in substance ensures compliance with Article 7 of the Convention and with essential elements of Resolution 12.10. We stand ready to provide any additional information and documentary evidence both on the legislation and on the specific cases identified by the Secretariat in the 5 breeding operations visited, to present a complete picture of the system in place in the EU and its member states and the situation at the particular breeding operations. We look forward to further exchanges with the Secretariat to better understand the Secretariat's concerns. And finally, we look forward to the parties' views in the Standing Committee, and we are ready to engage in constructive discussions with the Standing Committee and consider any potential compliance concerns parties may have on the matter, and also provide any further information if necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, the European Union. I will now give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. We appreciate the capacity pressures within the Secretariat, but to start with, we have to note that we have been a bit surprised with our experience of the process to date. Since the Secretariat's mission in October 2022 and the brief update provided at SC 75 in Panama, we have not had any engagement on this issue from the Secretariat until the publication of SC 77 Doc 33.1. I'll get on to the specifics of that document in a moment, but before commenting on these specific findings, we just wanted to provide a few general observations. The UK and EU are far from unique in exporting captive-bred Appendix 1 specimens under Source Code C and Purpose Code T. The UK, and as recognised by other parties and even the Secretariat previously, is of the long-standing opinion that the registration programme for animals is unnecessarily complicated. As a result, many parties have chosen to not fully apply Resolution Conf 1210 whilst fulfilling their obligations under Article 3 and Article 7.4 of the Convention. And a review of the CITES trade database indicates that there will be many operations breeding Appendix 1 species around the world that are not registered. The Secretariat has proposed in the past that the registration programme for animals be brought into line with a much simpler one for plants outlined in Resolution Conf 919, which is a potential way forward that COP20 could consider. Notwithstanding the specific physiological differences between plants and animals, we do not see a strong case for a management authority to be fully competent to assess the validity of a registration application from a nursery, but not that from a captive breeding operation. Additionally, we would note that there are ongoing discussions within Standing Committee and the scientific committees which acknowledge there are differing interpretations of Article 7.
the interpreters kindly ask if the speaker could speak a little more slowly, please?
On the substance contained in the document, I'm conscious that some of this will repeat what the EU has already said, and we share the EU sentiments relating to the effectiveness of similar systems in place in the EU and UK to meet the requirements of the Convention. But as the EU and UK cases are separate, we will set out our position as below. Similar to concerns raised yesterday in the consideration of other potential compliance cases under SC Doc 33.1, we are not clear, based on the evidence provided, how the UK is specifically not meeting the obligations under the Convention. As shown in the information contained in Doc 33.1, including the letter from the UK to the Secretariat included as the annex, we have clearly set out how the UK regulates the captive breeding of Appendix 1 species to not only meet the requirements of the Convention and Resolution 1016 in full, but to go beyond these requirements of the Convention in closely regulating domestic keeping and commercial use of these Appendix 1 species, and in considering legal acquisition and non-detriment on a specimen-by-specimen basis. In the UK, to support this regulatory regime, we have invested in further DNA testing capabilities so that parentage and familial claims can be examined to a robust forensic-level accuracy usable by our enforcement authorities. To provide an update on the case mentioned in paragraph 12 and by the Secretary in the introduction, this case was identified as part of our routine enforcement processes, utilising the DNA testing mentioned, and is progressing through the UK criminal justice system, with a trial expected next month. We consider this an example of how the system in the UK works to deter any non-compliant activity, but also identify and act on any such activity that does occur. In doing so, our processes and enforcement have successfully decoupled legitimate falconry activity from the wild population in the UK. Addressing the recommendations themselves, regarding recommendation AI, the report does not provide any evidence or specific cases that indicates the UK is not undertaking the necessary checks to ensure that parental stock has not been obtained in accordance with relevant national laws in the UK and the provisions of the Convention, and would suggest this conclusion is not adopted by the Standing Committee. On recommendation A, i, SC 77 document 59 highlights that within the working group discussions, there already exist differences in interpretation and practice in how Article 7.4 and Resolution 12.10 should be applied. And so this is an inappropriate time for the Standing Committee to be considering this via a potential compliance case, rather than through the existing intersessional Standing Committee working groups. We therefore respectfully request that, that these recommendations that suggest the UK is not implementing its obligations under Article 3 and Article 7, paragraph 4 of the Convention not be adopted by the Standing Committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, the United Kingdom. I will now open the floor for comments from the Standing Committee members and give the floor to Honduras.
Muchas gracias, señora Presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm going to speak on behalf of the Central, South American and Caribbean region. We agree with the recommendations that are in document 33.8, and in addition, we have to comment that some specimens don't have a clear LAF, and so we have to very much take traceability into account. We are very concerned about the Spix macaw, since in the wild it's extinct in Brazil, and so there is a genetic line that can only be found in captive bred or in captive specimens. So the European Union needs to adequately follow the origin of these parental stocks. And we also need information on the quantities, the destinations, and the financial incomes derived from the transfer of this species. Thank you.
Thank you, Honduras. I will just ask when folks are providing comments, if they're general to both documents, that's okay, but please specify which document you're referring to, because although the cases are similar, there are differences between them. I next give the floor to Brazil.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. Brazil thanks the Secretariat for preparing document 33.8 and aligns itself with the intervention made by our region in supporting its recommendations. The content of the document raised serious concerns in our country, and not only among the Brazilian CITES authorities, but also in our parliament, our civil society, and the press. In particular, it may lead to questioning about Brazil's position in relation to sales operations involving bird species endemic to our territory that are critically threatened with extinction. We therefore ask for your indulgence to bring some clarifications to this committee on the matter. First, it's important to make clear, once and for all, that the Brazilian government has never approved the sales operation of Spix Macau mentioned in the document. In fact, the Brazilian Management Authority competent to grant permits, which is the Brazilian Institute of Environment and Renewable Natural Resource, IBAMA, has never been consulted about this operation. In this regard, we would like to call your attention to Notification 52, issued in 2001 at the request of the Brazilian government, which requests all parties not to issue permits or certificates for import, export, or re-export specimens of Spix Macau without consulting the Brazilian Management Authority. Unfortunately, in the sale transactions referred in paragraph 46 of document 33.8, the case-by-case assessment applied by the European Union did not lead to the observation of this notification. And I would like to remember that Spix Macau is a species that's classified as extinct into the wild. Second, Brazil does not agree with any international transfer of Spix Macau that's not made under a management plan coordinated by the Brazilian authorities. And for the sake of clarity, ACTP, the institution that holds about 90% of the existing birds today, participates in the sale and participated in the sale operation mentioned in the document. Is part of a management program developed by the Brazilian government. However, we also would like to make clear that the facility where the birds were sent does not formally participate in the Spix Macau population management program developed by our government. Therefore, in our view, under no circumstances was the sale operation carried out in the context of the conservation program of the species developed by the Brazilian government. Third, it's also extremely important to make it clear that any transfer of Spix Macau currently in the possession of international breeders must be sent primarily to Brazil, the country of their origin and from where the species was illegally removed in the past. Therefore, in our view, any possible surplus population that may exist in facilities outside Brazil must be sent in principle to institutions located in our country. These institutions, more than any other institution in this planet, will be fully capable of implementing the management program of the species with the ultimate objective, which must be the objective of all of us, of achieving its sustainable reintroduction to wildlife. 4, we also would like to clarify that our government did not receive nor has no management over the significant remunerations, and I'm quoting document 33.8, derived from this operation. Furthermore, it's not clear for Brazil how the aforementioned sales operation of Spix Macau could have been considered as non-commercial. As document 33.8 recall, according to resolution 5.10 Rev COP19, the existence of economic benefit does not depend on the purpose for which this economic benefit is derived. Thus, even if these significant remunerations could have been reinvested totally or partially in the activities carried out by the breeder/seller, there were reasons at least for a possible non-commercial purpose to be investigated, including through a consultation with the Secretariat and the country of origin of the species. Such an investigation would be aligned, moreover, with General Principle 1 of the same resolution 5.10, which states that trade in Appendix 1 species must be subject to particularly strict regulation and authorized only in exceptional circumstances. Madam Chair, we would like to acknowledge that we had yesterday a bilateral meeting to clarify these facts with the CITES authorities of the country that issued the export permit. And while appreciating their gesture of seeking us out for a conversation, we express our hope that we can keep the closest communication between our CITES management authorities to prevent situations such as those involving operations with Speak Macau to happen again. We also will evaluate the possible measures to repatriate the birds that were subjected to the sale operation mentioned in the document. We count on the support of all CITES community on that. I thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I'll now give the floor to Kenya.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, Kenya representing Africa, we'd like to share the concerns raised by the Secretariat, and we'll wish to support the recommendation contained on document 33.8, just in line with Brazil, specifically that the EU should ensure that the facilities breeding specimens of Appendix 1 listed species for commercial purposes be registered with the CITES Secretariat in accordance with Resolution 12.10. Madam Chair, we do appreciate the oral updates given by both US, but EU on their document 3.81 and also by UK on document 3.1. And we wish to reiterate that the international cooperation is essential for the protection of species listed under CITES. It is therefore crucial that the EU, being one of the major consumer market for CITES species, and also a significant exporter of captive bred specimens, fully complies with all the gaps that have been identified in the Secretariat's report. And Chair, we do also recognize that the EU continues to support the countries of origin of the captive bred specimens, that many of which are developing countries, as stated by Brazil, that we need support. And in regard to the call by the Secretariat to UK on document 33.1, we wish to support the recommendation to implement the registration process as contained in that document. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenya. I will give the floor next to New Zealand.
Thank you. I'm going to speak first with a short combined introduction that relates to both the cases, and then I'm going to talk about each one individually. Thank you. We thank the Secretariat for these assessments made on the basis of the technical missions to the EU and the UK. We note relevance to Oceania of these operations that breed Appendix 1 animal species in captivity for commercial purposes, because Oceania species are bred in some of these facilities. We can sympathise with Brazil and Honduras that the experiences of range states are critically important when their species are apparently being traded illegally. We also note the particular significance of CITES Appendix 1 listed species, which are threatened with extinction and cannot be traded for primarily commercial purposes. An important principle for Oceania is that the CITES rules are applied consistently across all parties in accordance with current resolutions agreed by the Conference of Parties. I'm going to speak now on the EU situation. We thank the EU for its commitment to implementing CITES and describing the EU implementation practices in detail. However, on the basis of the information available, we do support the Secretariat's determination that Article 3 and Article 7, Paragraph 4 of the Convention are not being effectively implemented by the EU, with particular regard to evidence of parental stock being acquired in accordance with national laws and CITES, and the primarily commercial nature of the operations. For this reason, we support the Secretariat's recommendations that urge the exporting and importing countries to take a number of specific actions that will ensure compliance with CITES. We support the proposed guidance on the chain of custody and the criteria for the contribution that captive breeding operations make to conservation needs of species concerned. This will be very helpful. On the specific case of the import of 2 specimens of imperial Amazon and the 10 species of A. arusiaca from Dominica to Germany in 2018, we question whether it was truly an emergency response and believe these birds imported and their offspring should be repatriated to Dominica as soon as possible as requested by the Government of Dominica, with full cooperation of the Management Authority of Dominica. In our view, it would be useful to know how many of the 12 birds are still alive, how many offspring have been produced, and how many of these specimens or their offspring have been traded from the ACTP facility, including those returned to Dominica or exported from Germany. I'm now going to briefly speak on the UK. We thank the UK for describing its implementation process in detail, and we understand that many of the major falcon breeding facilities are already registered, so it is largely the hobby breeders that remain unregistered. However, on the basis of information available, we support the Secretariat's determination that it doesn't appear Article 3 and Article 7, Paragraph 4 of the Convention are being effectively implemented by the UK and Northern Ireland for these facilities with regard to, firstly, the evidence of parental stock being acquired in accordance with national laws and CITES, and secondly, the primarily commercial nature of the operations. We therefore support the recommendations that urge both the UK and importing countries to take specific actions to ensure compliance with CITES, noting that this should not affect trade from existing registered facilities. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. Now I open the floor to comments from observer parties. I give the floor to Benin.
Okay. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Benin would like to align itself with other speakers in thanking the Secretariat for this document and the recommendations contained therein. Whilst we recognise that captive breeding can contribute to the safeguarding of a species, but it can have an important negative impact on wild populations where the reproductive stock have been obtained in an unsustainable way. We need to ensure that there are sufficient controls in place, and captive breeding facilities can use illegally acquired stocks, and that's why we call for precaution, bearing in mind the work of CITES and the principles of legal acquisition, which is not detrimental to the parental stock and which can be traced back to the source of the original stock. Thank you.
Thank you, Benin. I am going to close the list for the speaker list for parties. I have about 7 in the queue. I give the floor next to Mexico.
Gracias.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to thank the Secretariat for the preparation of documents 33.8 and 33.1, which we will refer to. For Mexico, as a source country of species in Appendix 1, which are reproduced in other state parties, it's important that there is recognition and registration of facilities that produce these. Along with Honduras and Brazil, Kenya and New Zealand, Mexico supports the proposal from the Secretariat in paragraph 88 of document 33.8 and 45B of 33.1 that the committee calls on the European Union and the United Kingdom authorities that facilities that are breeding specimens of Appendix 1 listed species for commercial purposes be registered with CITES Secretariat in accordance with Res. Conf 12.10. And we see with concern that amongst the most commercialized species, we have Mexican parrots such as the Amazona oratrix, Amazona oropaliata, and macaw. And we see that they are all highly threatened. And first of all, we will see the capacity for captive breeding of the specimens, then the legal precedence of the parental stock and countries of origin, and then the registration of the establishments for the conservation of species. On this last point, we also invite on European Union parties to consider the implementation of Resolution 13.9 on the encouragement of cooperation with the breeding of species ex situ and work in situ in order to support the conservation work in countries of origin. Thank you.
Thank you, Mexico. I will give the floor now to the United States.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would like to align ourselves with many of the comments made here. The United States agrees with the Secretariat's recommendation that the Standing Committee determine that Article 3 and Article 7, Paragraph 4 of the Convention are not being effectively implemented by these parties with regard to the registration of operations that breed Appendix 1 animal species in captivity for commercial purposes. We support urging the EU and its member states and the United Kingdom to ensure that facilities that are breeding specimens of Appendix 1 species are registered with the CITES Secretariat in accordance with the procedures established in Resolution Conf 1210, Rev. Cop 15, prior to authorizing international trade for commercial purposes. We also support the recommendation that the management authorities of these parties not issue permits or re-export certificates for export of Appendix 1 species for commercial purposes. Regarding the Secretariat's recommendation in document SC 77 Doc 33.8 concerning the development of guidance regarding determining the legal acquisition of parental stock and what constitutes a continuing meaningful contribution according to the conservation needs of the species, we agree that these would be useful tools for parties in implementing Resolution Conf 12.10 and support the recommendation. Noting that the Standing Committee has an ongoing intersessional working group whose mandate is to review Resolution Conf 12.10, we recommend that the Standing Committee direct the Secretariat to ensure that its work to develop this guidance is closely coordinated with the Intersessional Working Group in order to ensure complementarity and avoid duplication. Based on the information provided that the export permit was issued by an entity that was not designated the designated management authority, and that the export occurred at a time when Dominica was subject to a recommended trade suspension, the United States also supports the conclusion that the trade of 2 specimens of Amazona imperialis and 10 specimens of Amazona araucariaca from Dominica to Germany in 2018 was contrary to the provisions of the convention. Furthermore, a letter published by Birds Caribbean, sent by the Ministry of Environment, Rural Modernization, and Kalinago Upliftment, Republic of Dominica in 2010, indicates that Dominica has sought the repatriation of these birds. And as with the intervention from our colleagues from Oceania, we would seek additional information on the status of these birds and any offspring and efforts to repatriate them. Additionally, with regard to the issue raised in paragraph 91 of the document, in the event we consider exceptional circumstances and contemplate exceptions, we would urge that they be very narrow and focused on non-commercial trade in emergencies for health and safety of living specimens, and ultimate return of the specimen and any offspring to the country of export, and not other varied interests. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, United States. I give the floor to Burkina Faso.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Burkina Faso is speaking on document 33.8. Burkina Faso supports also the statement from Brazil, Honduras, and Benin, as well as the recommendations of the Secretariat in document 33.8. We would like to remind parties that with resolution 3510, COP19, the economic benefits are not linked to the way in which they're carried out. Brazil mentioned this. The expression for commercial purposes should be mentioned and explained insofar as possible so that transactions that are not fully non-commercial be considered commercial. Thank you.
Thank you, Burkina Faso. I give the floor now to Switzerland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just some general remarks. I'm not entering in the 2 documents. I think if, as mentioned by the Secretariat, discussions are going on for more than 20 years or for roughly 20 years about interpretation, then we may have a problem on other points. So maybe we should go one step back, because it can't be that we are discussing such an important issue and having just different interpretations. So that's just to give an idea of possible discussion in the future. Secondly, it was also named that, especially in Germany, we have hobbyists, people breeding animals in Appendix 1 for hobby reason. We have the same situation in Switzerland. Now we are talking a lot about commercial or primarily commercial. What does it mean? The standard breeder in Switzerland of Appendix 1 species works 40 hours a week. He's employed by a bank or an insurance. He works as a teacher or a plumber or a carpenter. So he keeps a few gray parrots, for example, and from time to time he sells 1 or 2 of them within Switzerland. And in some rare cases, they are also exported. In our view, That's not commercial. He needs the money, or he invests the money he earns in his job to keep the animals. And last but not least, especially these hobbyists in some cases played an important role in the conservation of species still existing, and without having this private people maybe trying to keep this animal, we wouldn't have them anymore. So just this as some general remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Switzerland. I now give the floor to Canada.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to the Secretariat for bringing forward these two papers, and to the EU and the UK for some of their explanations. Chair, Canada is struggling with this paper, and in particular, we're struggling with the conversation around what is compliance. So as we have indicated in our previous interventions, Canada understands to be a compliance system to be related to compliance with the articles of the Convention. It is unfortunate to us that this paper seems to be focused on compliance with a resolution of this convention. Therefore, this paper appears to be making an obligation out of something that is a non-binding resolution. It is a trend we watch with regret, as we feel it undermines the important system of compliance with the obligations that we have developed. So for us in Canada, what we think is at issue here is compliance with Article 7, Paragraph 4. Like the United Kingdom, we note that the application of Article 7, and in particular paragraphs 4 and 5, contains some ambiguities. These are under discussion of a working group of this standing committee, and they have been under discussion in some form for some time. In our view, the existing body of resolutions does not provide a clear and unambiguous application of these two articles. So it is difficult to bring compliance matters against that body of resolutions as a whole. We note the comments made by Switzerland on commercial, and we do see in this and in other documents under item 33 some questions about what is primarily commercial. We think that is also an important conversation that perhaps needs to be had. However, for this particular case, again, for us, the issue is the implementation of Article 7.4 and the obligations associated with it as they are contained in the Convention. So based on the evidence provided in the paper, firstly for the United Kingdom, we do not see evidence that the United Kingdom is not fulfilling its obligations under the Convention, and so we do not agree with the recommendations made by the Secretariat. With regards to the European Union, as the European Union stated in their intervention, for compliance, it is important to evaluate specific cases of non-compliance and not to evaluate an entire system of application. In this regard, we do not agree, again, with the recommendations made by the Secretariat directed to the European Union in the whole. We have heard very valid concerns from Brazil and echoed by Mexico regarding the trade in captive bred specimens of species found within their territories. We do note that if there was registration in the European Union, there would be some greater transparency, as Mexico had pointed out. Again, we recognize we would encourage, in fact, the European Union to consider registering their systems, but we recognize it is not an obligation. Regarding the points raised by Brazil, it seems that there may be a specific case for follow-up, and so we would also support a recommendation asking the Secretariat to follow up on that specific case to see if indeed the obligations of the Convention are being met for the species and trade that were raised here. From what we have in the document, it is difficult for Canada to evaluate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada. I now give the floor to the Republic of Korea.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. The Republic of Korea would like to begin our intervention by congratulating you on your election as the chair. Additionally, we extend our hopes for Rosemary's swift recovery. We also express our appreciation to the CITES Secretariat and the Swiss government for their efforts in preparing this important meeting. With regard to document 33.8, during COP18 in 2019, the Secretary requested a bilateral consultation that we improve our management practices, considering our importation of Appendix 1 animals with source code C, while treating them as the appendix species on the basis of export permit from European parties. In response, the Korean authority promptly resolved this issue by instructing importers to import these animals in accordance with Article 3 of the Convention. Despite this action, we have observed a persistent demand for importing these animals, leading to various complaints from Korean importers. In this context, we wish to emphasize that this situation results in ongoing administrative expenses. In the end, we are concerned that these expenses will be a major obstacle to achieving the goals of the Convention. Hence, the Republic of Korea welcomes the discussion on this item, and as indicated in the document, acknowledge the management efforts made by EU to fully implement the Convention. We also hope the Standing Committee will adopt appropriate measures taking account of the Secretary recommendations. To alleviate the confusion and administrative pressure experienced by importing countries, we request the EU promptly fulfill the decision of the Standing Committee. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Korea. I give the floor now to Senegal.
Merci, Madam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senegal supports the Secretariat's recommendations in 33.8. According to CITES, Appendix 1 listed specimens trade can only take place under the most strict of circumstances. Resolution Conf 1210 calls for the registration of those establishments that are breeding specimens that are Appendix 1 listed for commercial purposes. The registration allows for their appropriate nature to be verified. We therefore agree with the suggestion that the EU authorities ensure that those operations that breed Appendix 1 animal species be registered, this in keeping with Conf 1210. We also support the resolution that no export or re-export permits be granted for commercial purposes for Appendix 1 listed species that have been bred in non-registered establishments. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Senegal. I give the floor now to Indonesia.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving Indonesia the floor for agendas 33.8 and 33.1 for UK. First of all, Indonesia would like to thank the Secretariat for their report and for their hard work on this issue and for bringing this important issue to our attention. Indonesia considers the issue of parenting registration as very important, as we all agree with it under Resolution 12.10. In addition, Indonesia is of the view that our obligation to encouraging cooperation between parties with ex situ breeding operations and those with in situ conservation programs, as per Resolution 13.9, will not be applied if the parenting registration is not met. Therefore, Indonesia would like to support Brazil's and Honduras and other statements and concerns, since this issue could also affect Indonesia and all other hosts of biodiversity diverse countries. We believe that all parties under the Convention have the same level of obligation We do not support the idea that one country's national law is better than CITES rules. The rules and compliance should apply to everyone. It's the same. Furthermore, Resolution 13.9 is very important since it is the access of benefit sharing under CITES. It is the ABS of CITES. Without application of parenting registration, such benefit sharing will not be possible to the country of origin. In that regard, as stated and supported by many, including by the US, we agree with the recommendation of the Secretariat under both cases and documents. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Indonesia. And I give the floor to China.
Thank you, Madam Chair. China echoes Canada on this issue. China notes the efforts made by the EU and the UK, as well as comments made by the other parties. China would like to suggest the Standing Committee to encourage the Secretariat to further engage EU and the UK for more information before determining whether Article 3 or Article 7 are being effectively implemented or not. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, China. I now open the floor for observer organizations. I give the floor to Pro Wildlife.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm making this statement on behalf of 16 organizations in relation to document 33.8 on the EU. We agree with the statements made by Brazil and many others and thank the Secretariat for their report and urge the Standing Committee to adopt the recommendations included therein. It is crucial that commercial trade in Appendix 1 species is restricted to specimens from breeding facilities registered with the CITES Secretariat, as the registration process requires that evidence be provided for the legal acquisition of founder stock and, importantly, provides for participation of range states in the approval process. Besides failure by the EU to trace legal acquisition over the entire supply chain back to source, the Secretariat's report also highlights serious shortcomings with regard to identifying the commercial nature of transactions and misapplication of Purpose Code B. One of the most egregious examples is the trade in Spix macaws. Others include St. Vincent Amazons and Lear's macaws. Spix macaws were driven to extinction in the wild, primarily because of capture for private collectors. We understand that in total, approximately 100 Spix macaws, 1/3 of the specimens in existence, appear to have recently been traded and transferred within the EU from the German facility owning the vast majority of these birds. Commercialization of trade in such rare species is an extremely risky endeavor, threatening attempts to re-establish the species in the wild and should never have been permitted. It undermines demand reduction efforts and actually increases demand for these rare species. It also sets a very dangerous precedent for the management of other rare bird and reptile species that are highly valued by collectors. For this reason, we also urge the Standing Committee, in the interest of transparency, to request Germany to report how many Spix macaws were transferred to which facilities or private individuals, in which countries and under which conditions, including for sale, lease or loan, and to clarify who has ownership of these birds. In recognition of the devastating effect that collection of wild specimen has had on the species, and in keeping with the intention of CITES Notification 52 of 2001, we believe that all Spix macaws which were not accompanied by correctly issued permits or certificates, or who were not transferred with endorsement of Brazil's management authority and are not part of the country's captive breeding program, should be seized and returned to Brazil. Regarding paragraph 91, we are convinced the import of the extremely rare parrots from Dominica to Germany was not in compliance with the convention, as the exporting country was under a trade suspension at that time and the permit had not been signed by the designated CITES authority. We also would like to draw the attention of the parties to information documents number 17 and 18 on this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pro Wildlife. So I thank everyone for their comments and engagement on this issue. And so now I'm going to focus on the Standing Committee. And I'm going to take the documents separately, starting with the recommendations for the European Union in Doc 33.8. So I invite the committee to provide comments specific to the recommendations in Doc 38.8, paragraph 87. Is there agreement with the recommendation from the Secretariat regarding subparagraph A and B in regards to the European Union? I'm seeing a few head nods, shakes. Let's start with A. Is there agreement? I give the floor to Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As Standing Committee member, I reiterate the comments made by Canada and others that a compliance case should only be brought to the attention of this body when there's a specific concern with a specific transaction or specific transactions that go against the Convention. The case presented by the Secretariat was on the entire system of the EU, but the document does not provide clear evidence of contravention of the Convention, not for the individual cases, let alone for the entire system set in place up by the EU or the UK. So the recommendations, in our view, should not be adopted. And I would also like to remind the Chair and the members of the Standing Committee that whenever the EU speaks, they speak on behalf of the EU and its 27 member states. So even though there have been a number of parties suggesting the adoption of the recommendations, I want to remind everyone of the fact that it's not only the EU that speaks, but it does it on behalf of the 27 member states as well. Thank you.
Other committee members? The United States.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to make explicit, as we As you heard from the discussion, we do not have a consensus position within the North America region, so we will not participate as a committee member in the decision-making on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Let's move to paragraph 90 and see if we can have a discussion upon paragraph 90 regarding taking comments on paragraph 90, Indonesia.
On the 3 paragraphs, as we mentioned, we have stated our agreement with the Secretariat's proposals, paragraph 87, 89, 88, 89, 90. So it's clear, right? But just want to respond to the comments made by the Belgium delegation on the fact that you make statement on behalf of 27, but in our case, the standing committee consists of 16. I believe that fact is irrelevant in our case. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Indonesia. Any more comments on paragraph 90 about the Secretariat developing additional guidance regarding the chain of custody required for demonstrating legal acquisition, as well as standardize the objective criteria for implementing the requirements stated in paragraph 5 of Resolution 12.10. Is there support for the Secretariat developing guidance? The Standing Committee developing guidance. I give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Clarification, have we moved on from paragraph 87 because we were wanting to come in on that point and say that we have, on the evidence provided, we're satisfied that Article 7.4 has been met. And as a representative of the European region, just to respond to the comment from Indonesia, there are 2 EU seats on the Standing Committee, so it is more than 1, I suppose. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any comments on paragraph 90?
I suppose just on the timeliness of that, how it interrelates with the other recommendations, so we'll not come in at this point.
New Zealand.
Thank you. I just wanted to reiterate that we support the recommendations in paragraph 87 and 90. In fact, we supported all of them. But I also just wanted to comment that in our view, compliance is not just about a specific case, but it can also be about a process or system that is not working as well. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. I give the floor to Brazil.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. And I thank you, New Zealand, for this clarification. And I also, well, we are getting a bit confused about the reference of how many people are represented here. So I would like just to recall that the manifestation made by my colleague from Honduras was made in supporting the document, with the recommendations was made on behalf of all the region of South America, Central America, and the Caribbean. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. Okay. Okay, what I'm hearing is two divergent views, and so I'm trying to find a way forward. If there is a compromise, if there's alternate language, if there, like what, I'm looking to the committee to look for a way forward on this issue. And so I'm open to suggestions. I think, I mean, like looking at recommendation 89, that is language that is in the resolution 1210. Recommendation 90 is for the Standing Committee to develop guidance on chain of custodies required to demonstrate legal acquisition and to implement some of the requirements regarding, in the resolution regarding captive breeding operations, making a conservation needs for the species concerned. I mean, can we coalesce around some of these recommendations further on in the document? I'll give the floor to the European Union.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would just, well, first of all, I would like to really thank the parties for all their views, and we have heard interventions on specific cases, on the system in the EU, and also different wider issues, registration procedure itself, which has been undergoing review, the differences in interpretation of Article 7, and the inconsistencies in the body of relevant resolution. So the discussion is extremely complex. We think it would be important to distinguish between the different elements, and in particular, the conclusions to be made on the system in place, whether it complies with the convention, and then the specific cases. So I would like to ask when we will be able to respond to some of the points made, both as the EU on the system in place, but also given the opportunity to our colleagues in Germany to respond to some specific cases that were mentioned.
You can use this time now, the European Union, to respond to some of the specific statements that were made about your system, and then I will turn the floor over to Germany to respond specifically about some of the statements that were made.
Thank you very much. As indicated at the beginning, we would be happy to provide additional information as requested, and we are happy to follow up with the Secretariat on any specific issues they have found. In particular, we stand ready to supply information to show how we effectively implement Resolution 10.16 in law and practice. The EU approach is an approach which applies the required substantive assessment at the level of EU member states in every single case, and not primarily upfront when the operation is registered according to Resolution 1210. For this reason, for instance, we consider that the impact on wild populations, so a point mentioned a few times, we do consider we have sufficient controls in place to ensure that wild populations are not negatively impacted by the trade in captive bred specimens. And we are of the view that case-by-case evaluation provides a stronger safeguard compared to a one-time assessment. Especially keeping in mind that paragraph 6c urges parties to incentivize registration by providing administrative benefits to a registered facility compared to other applicants. However, we do remain open to discuss any improvements if they are needed based on the concerns from the Secretariat. As to the difficulties with the registration procedure itself, we would like to subscribe to the points made on the work of the working group on captive breeding and also the work of the joint working group of Plant and Animals Committee that have a mandate given by the COP to review challenges in the applications of the Convention's Article 7, paragraphs 4 and 5. We do question if this resolution is achieving what it was intended to do and feel that the working group has an important task in clarifying this. And in addition, another working group deals with specific proposals to amend Resolution 1210. So the results of these discussions will have to be taken into account as well. It's not an ideal timing for fast conclusions in the potential compliance case against us. We also heard several parties mentioning the need to contribute to conservation efforts of the range states, and the EU has supported and will continue to support range states through international cooperation instruments and also specifically under CITES, including support to in situ conservation efforts and programs. The EU and member states are fully committed the respect of the ABS requirements, and the EU is party to CBD and the Nagoya Protocol. What concerns the points made by Brazil and partly also some other parties with regard to specific cases, we do consider that those concern specific cases and not the compliance case as a whole. And so we would also ask then colleagues of the party concerned, Germany, to take the floor on those points. And yeah, just to conclude that we remain open to consider any improvements we should be doing in our system in place. And yeah, looking forward to finding further information on what were exactly the shortcomings identified. Thank you.
Thank you, the European Union. I give the floor next to Germany.
Thank you, Chair. As this is the first time Germany takes the floor, we would like to congratulate you for being appointed as Chair. Also, we can already congratulate you on your excellent guidance in this meeting. Please convey Rosemary our best wishes for a quick recovery. Furthermore, we would also like to thank the Secretariat and Switzerland for hosting and organizing this meeting. Having listened to some of the statements in the room today, Germany feels the need to firstly provide some background information concerning the transfer of 26 Spix macaws from Germany to India early in 2023, and afterwards, if you allow, on the 2018 import of 10 redneck parrots and 2 imperial parrots from Dominica, both being addressed in document 33.8. So I'm speaking on the Spix now. At the outset of it, we would like to thank our Brazilian colleagues for a very good meeting yesterday. We look forward to continuing and deepening our close cooperation with Brazil in the interest of biodiversity protection and species conservation. Regarding the issue of the export of Spix macaw, we would like to reassure this committee, and Brazil in particular, that every decision made by the German authorities at all times was done in good faith and is driven by the intent of fostering the conservation breeding efforts of a species extinct in the wild, the Spix macaw, with a long-term goal of reintroducing the species to its natural habitat in the Caatinga, Brazil. We are pleased to note reports that some of the birds were reintroduced in the wild in 2022 and have recently successfully reproduced in the wild for the first time. We would now like to turn to the specific transfer in question. Germany permitted the export to the Indian facility, Green Zoological Rescue and Rehabilitation Center, after consultation with the Indian CITES Management Authority and after careful consideration to allow for the establishment of a second reserve population in another location, thereby increasing the biosecurity of the ex-situ population, not least in view of concerns raised in this respect before. Germany checked that the specimens would be housed in a state-of-the-art facility, particularly suited for this species and its conservation breeding requirements. We would like to underline firmly that measures were taken to ensure that the exports were not commercial in nature. The permit itself excludes any possibility of commercial usage for the exported specimen and for their potential offspring. In addition, a conservation breeding loan agreement between the Association for the Conservation of Threatened Parrots, ACTP, and GZRRC, concluded before the transfer, clarifies that the transaction is non-commercial. Besides, ACTP is a German non-profit registered association which underlies national association law and scrutiny of national finance and tax authorities, not allowing for commerciality, including prohibition of any profits made. In addition, all 26 specimens exported, including their potential offspring, remain part of the stud book and the conservation breeding program. The conservation breeding loan agreement also clarifies that ownership in the specimens is not transferred. To conclude, in light of all these considerations and safeguards applied, Germany used Purpose Code B, which is breeding in captivity, for this export. Finally, we want to stress that we acted in good faith under the assumption that Brazil was in accordance with the export in question. This assumption was based on documents made available to Germany that originated from the Brazilian government authority in charge of the conservation breeding program, as well as direct exchanges with the Brazilian government authorities concerning the conservation breeding program of Spix macaw up until the year 2022. In our very good exchange with our Brazilian colleagues yesterday, we learned that we unfortunately overlooked that a notification entitled Trade in Specimens of Cyanopsita spixi from 2001 asked parties to specifically consult the Brazilian Management Authority. We would like to assure Brazil and the Standing Committee that we will duly follow the procedure laid out in the notification from now on. Further, we would like to note our commitment to continue our fruitful dialogue with Brazil with the objective to do everything we can to help with the conservation of this species. As it concerns the second case, the import of parrots from Dominica, in 2018, 10 redneck parrots and 2 imperial parrots were imported from Dominica to Germany in a case of emergency. The import was permitted in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria, a Category 5 hurricane, which had devastating effects, among other things, on the parrot species populations and habitat. Individual parrots were kept in captivity in Dominica, could not be cared for adequately. That's why the government of Dominica, represented by the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, asked Germany at that time for urgent support regarding the conservation of their national birds. Just to be clear, upon our request, it was again confirmed by the then acting minister that he was exercising the role of the National CITES Management Authority. In this situation, where real danger of losing the few remaining animals was present, the government of Dominica decided to establish a conservation breeding program with a long-term goal of restocking the local population and conserving it for future generations. This included the establishment of a previously non-existent backup population, also outside of the natural distribution area. To achieve that goal, Dominica relied on external expertise and support regarding the breeding and husbandry of parrots. Hence, the government of Dominica concluded a breeding loan agreement with ACTP, guaranteeing Dominica to retain the power of disposition over all parrots and their offspring. Both the import permits as well as a breeding loan agreement guarantee that the animals imported in a situation of emergency, the situation of emergency and for conservation breeding purposes only, remain the property of Dominica and can be returned at any time at their request. To our knowledge, a request has not been issued so far to return the birds. The trade suspension imposed on Dominica at that time, of course, presented a difficult situation. We face the question of whether to help in a situation of emergency which implicated the survival of a species on the one hand, and the fact that there was a trade suspension because of non-reporting on the other. In this situation, we concluded that the objective and purpose of the trade suspension, again said, imposed for not providing the annual report for 3 consecutive years, was not to prevent urgency measures taken solely in support of the survival of the species concerned, which was at imminent risk. We felt at that time that this decision would best reflect the objective and spirit of the Convention. Germany had no ill intent when making the decision to offer a safe haven, and we informed the CITES Secretariat about this import, even if only possible afterwards. However, we acknowledge that a trade suspension is a strictest compliance measure and as such should not be opened up individually by a party without the consent of the Standing Committee. Therefore, we would not act in the same way if confronted again with such a situation. As it concerns the question raised by New Zealand, we can confirm that no exports of these parrots were permitted. Finally, we are happy to provide further information on these cases to the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, Germany. I give the floor to Mexico.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We'd like to express our concern in that this discussion could set a poor precedent for the future of our convention. I'm wondering what was the point of presenting at various sessions of the Standing Committee full expedients and various working sessions to look at the registration of farms. It's been a lot of time. Mexico participated in Santiago in 2002 at the Conference of the Parties to facilitate the registration of breeding facilities so that all facilities that reproduce species listed in CITES appendices are within the framework of the convention. I remember long discussions where countries like the Philippines, which have facilities, and with the support of countries of origin, it was not possible to register this. So I don't understand why now we're saying we're not going to register them within the convention. This means that we're not participating on an equal footing. It's not been easy for countries of origin to achieve registrations. So countries that are not those of origin should also participate within the framework of the convention, as we are doing in good faith. So Mexico, in its previous intervention, proposed that part of the language of paragraphs 88 of document 33.8 and paragraph 45 of document 33.1 should remain as part of the recommendations in the part of encouraging European Union parties and those in the United Kingdom to register their installations in accordance with the provisions of the Convention. So maintain the positive language, inviting them to carry out the registration and removing the punitive part linked to the suspension of the issuance of export permits. So we'd like to take this opportunity to call on all parties to participate with goodwill and with a spirit of constructiveness for the good of our convention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mexico. I give the floor now to Chad.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm taking the floor on behalf of West and Central Africa. Madam Chair, I think that most of the interventions that we have been following, many converge towards the spirit of the Convention, which today gives us a mandate as representatives of Central and West Africa to support the intervention of Kenya, Senegal on the recommendations of the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. I give the floor back to Brazil.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor once again. And I would like to thank the German delegation for the clarification made. We would like to note and that we, in no moment, we doubt or question their good faith or the good faith of German, in this case related to Speaks Macau. And we do understand that the meeting we had yesterday is a first step of a closer cooperation. And in this spirit, we would like to ask for more information about the mentioned 100 speaks that have been traded inside the European Union. We would like to know what are their destinies, and when these operations, the sales, have been done. We also would like to, following what Mexico has just mentioned, we would like to say that for Brazil, the implementation of these conventions, resolutions, and decisions are crucial for the implementation of the convention itself. We are following rules of procedure which are not in the convention text. It's a decision probably of the Conference of the Parties. So we understand that when we talk about the compliance with the convention, we are also, we need to assess how is the compliance with the convention's decisions and resolution, how is it going? So thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I give the floor to Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Chair. Ours is just a small suggestion for consistency with the earlier recommendations that the committee has adopted with regards to paragraph 88, where it reads may wish. We may want to be a bit more instructive. Perhaps it should read should. Someone else can provide better English, but we want to be more consistent with regards to what this paragraph actually is advising the EU to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Zimbabwe. I give the floor to Canada.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the parties for this conversation. I think there's a number of issues that have been raised here, and they're all really instructive, and so there are conversations that I think we do need to continue, but I am, again, mindful that we are in a compliance discussion right now, and so I underscore that Canada, again, does not believe that compliance issues have been identified. Chair, you're asking for some support regarding the recommendations, and so I will provide our view on these recommendations for the consideration of the committee. So first of all, for the recommendations regarding in the paragraphs A and B, for the EU paper, it's recommendation 87, but the same applies to the UK. Canada cannot support these recommendations, and we do not have an alternative to provide. So instead, I'll turn then to recommendation, which in the EU paper is recommendation 88. However, and I don't have the number for the UK, but in both cases, what Canada would be able to support is a recommendation from the Standing Committee urging the CITES management authorities of the EU and the UK to register their facilities in accordance with 1210. So we would be supportive of urging the countries to give serious consideration to this resolution that was adopted by the parties for various reasons that have been outlined here by our colleagues, and to consider further registering facilities that breed for commercial purposes. Regarding paragraph 89, I mean, what we're doing in paragraph 89 here is simply recalling decisions that have already been taken. I don't think it's a necessary recommendation, but parties themselves are making these choices, and so we don't really have a strong view on that one. Regarding paragraph 90, I think we've underlined some really fundamental issues that are clearly needing discussion and are in ongoing discussions. I think rather than asking for developing additional guidance, I think we have existing working groups that are tackling some of these issues, and so we should just recognize that those working groups are undertaking their mandates and hope that with the fulfillment of those mandates, we will be further along in coming to some common understandings. So in the EU paper regarding 91, Canada, as we mentioned, we don't find that there is a non-compliance issue. However, Canada would support a recommendation from the Standing Committee requesting that the Secretariat engage with Germany and with Brazil regarding the concerns raised by Brazil to obtain further information and evaluate whether or not the obligations under Article 7.4 are being fulfilled. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your time while I worked this out. I'm going to propose a few things to the Standing Committee. This is for document 33.8, the case with the European Union. I'm going to start with paragraph 88 in the recommendations, and I'm going to propose the language in the truncated recommendation provided by Mexico and also by Canada for the recommendation to be that the Standing Committee urge the CITES management authorities of the EU to ensure that facilities that are breeding specimens of Appendix 1 species for commercial purposes are registered with CITES. I'm going to propose also that the recommendation 89, that invites parties to restrict imports for primarily commercial purposes as defined in Resolution 5.10 of captive bred specimens of Appendix 1 species to those produced by operations including in the CITES register, and to reject any permit or certificate granted under Article 7, Paragraph 4, if the specimens concerned do not originate from registered facilities, and if the permit or certificate does not describe the identifying mark applied to each specimen. This is the information that is included in the resolution and being restated here. For recommendation number 90, paragraph 90, I am proposing that the Standing Committee invite the Secretariat to provide a document that includes elements of guidance on the recommendations that are provided in this document in paragraph A and B to Standing Committee 78 for further consideration. And for recommendation 91, I am proposing that the Standing Committee invite the Secretariat to follow up with Brazil, Germany, and Dominica regarding the cases identified in the document for the species Amazona imperialis, Ara araucaria, as well as the Spix macaw. And so I'm asking the committee, how do you feel about those recommendations? I'm going to take silence as consensus on those recommendations. Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you please repeat again the revised recommendation number 88? Thank you.
The recommendation will be the Standing Committee urges the CITES management authorities of the European Union to ensure that facilities that are breeding specimens in Appendix 1 listed species for commercial purposes be registered with CITES. Okay. The full recommendation will be in accordance with the resolution 14.3 Rev Cops. No. I'm sorry.
This bit, in accordance with the procedures established in. That was just the bit you missed at the end.
In accordance with the procedures. We'll add the bit at the end in accordance with the procedures established in Resolution 12.10, Rev Cop 15. I'm not hearing any opposition to that. And so the Standing Committee agrees to those revised recommendations for 88, 89, 90, and 91. And so for recommendation 87, I'm still having polarized views on that recommendation. And I'm going to ask the committee if they have any ideas on a way forward. Brazil, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving the floor. Just for clarification, recommendation 87 would be deleted in your suggestion? No.
We haven't taken up recommendation 87 yet.
Sorry.
We haven't taken up that. That's where we are now, is discussing recommendation 87.
Okay, thank you.
I don't see any. Oh, Switzerland.
Thank you, Chair. I think we have disagreement there. Maybe if we word 87 differently, requesting the Secretariat to further liaise with the European Union on this issue. Because I mean, the European Union has provided information, but also said they would be willing to provide more information on this issue so that it could be dealt with maybe later. Because here we do not have agreement now to decide on that. So maybe that we ask the Secretary to liaise again with the EU on these matters and then maybe come back. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. How does the committee feel about the proposal from Switzerland? I give the floor to Chad.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that when there is no apparent consensus, it might be best to move on to a vote.
I just want to confirm with the representative from Chad, are you asking for a vote? Are you calling for a vote? I give the floor to Chad.
Oui.
I'm representing the sub-region of Central and West Africa. I have listened to the statements made by different parties, and I am here as part of an African sub-region. I think really, given there is no consensus, in order to expedite this matter, we really should move to a vote. I really don't know that there's going to be any point in prolonging this discussion. I think it's possibly been difficult for you to actually reach consensus in the room, so I think it might be best to decide by a vote. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Chad. So I'm going to turn it over to the Secretary to provide a report on the credentials.
Thank you, Chair. The situation today is that all members of the Standing Committee have provided the credentials, so they are all allowed to vote under this agenda item. Thank you.
I give the floor to Kuwait.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to support the idea by Chad and to move this agenda item to vote. Thank you.
So I'm not taking any more interventions, and thank you, Kuwait. Okay, committee members, we are going to take a vote now. And so this vote is on recommendation 87 in SC 77 Doc 33.8. For the committee members who agree with this recommendation, please raise your placards. To confirm, I have agreement that they agree with the recommendations for Morocco, Madagascar, Kenya, Chad, Indonesia, Kuwait, Japan, Brazil, Honduras, Dominican Republic, and Oceania, which is New Zealand representing Oceania. The recommendations are adopted with a simple majority. And with that, it concludes this agenda item 33.8, and we will move to the agenda item 33.1 and the recommendations 45, A through C. Okay, committee, for the recommendations in 33.1, I'm going to take recommendation little b and little c, propose amending recommendation B to read, urge the CITES Management Authority of the United Kingdom to ensure that facilities that are breeding specimens of Appendix 1 listed species for commercial purposes be registered with the CITES Secretariat in accordance with the procedures established in Resolution 1210, Rev Cop 15 on registrations of operations that breed Appendix 1 species in captivity for commercial purposes. Is there agreement on that recommendation? The Standing Committee agrees on that revised recommendation. Recommendation C. Is there agreement on Recommendation C as written in the document? The Standing Committee adopts Recommendation C. In regards to Recommendation 45, paragraph 45, Recommendation A. Does the committee have a way forward on this one? Would like to propose a way forward on this one? The United Kingdom?
We'd like to make a point that in the previous item it was regrettable to go to a vote before we'd fully had the chance to reach a consensus. However, on this document, we'd like to come back to a point already made, that in document 33.1, there is no specific evidence to provided as to how or when the requirements relating to legal acquisition of parental stock were not met. We also heard no specific points from parties intervening on how or when the UK has not adequately determined legal acquisition of parent stock for any individuals exported from the UK. Accordingly, we remain confused how parties can come to the view that this was not the case and support recommendation little a(i). Also, to address a point that a number of parties made related to conservation outcomes. In the UK, for context, we are almost exclusively talking about peregrine falcons, for which we are range state, and some gyrfalcons. Both species have been recently assessed as least concern by the IUCN in 2020 and 2021 respectively, with stable or increasing populations. While the applicability of an Appendix 1 listing is not what we're here to discuss, in lieu of existing guidance, it does raise questions of how to adequately ensure that operations of all scales can individually contribute a meaningful and continuing meaningful contribution to the conservation of the species. Thank you.
Thank you, the United Kingdom. Taking any other comments from the committee? Belgium, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We support the intervention just made by the UK about the fact that there's lack of evidence that the breeding stock was acquired in contravention of the convention, and also fully support the part of the intervention made on the conservation benefit of each individual facility that would need to be registered if we are to comply with the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Belgium. Is there support for recommendation A in document 33.1? I'm seeing some head nods, seeing some no's. It doesn't look like the majority is supporting the recommendations in this document. Is that a correct assessment? I need to see either some statements or I need to see body language, something. I only saw one head shake. Okay, yes. Yes. 3. Any thoughts on this item from the Central and South American and Caribbean region? You have the floor, New Zealand.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate that Oceania supported all the recommendations in this document relating to the UK, and that in our view it's very important that a consistent approach is applied in terms of decisions made under CITES. And this situation is very similar to the situation we've just discussed in the EU. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. New Zealand, do you have a proposed way forward? I give the floor to Kenya.
Thank you, Chair. I think just like New Zealand, we had already supported the recommendations of the Secretariat. And in the spirit of time again, if there's no consensus, Rule 15 calls for another vote so that we can make progress.
Does anyone else on the committee supports a vote? Kuwait.
Thank you, Chair. We will support the vote.
Thank you, Kuwait. So regarding United Kingdom, you have the floor.
We just wanted to come back to the point about evidence and whether or not the Secretariat had any points they'd like to highlight to the Standing Committee before we do go to a vote.
I give the floor to the Secretariat.
Thank you, Chair, and we recognize the need for consistency, but we also recognize the difference in the cases because this case with the UK was in a different document because they are mainly, the case is referring to native species, as explained by the UK, the bird of prey, and some of the facilities are already registered. So there is a slight difference for the committee to consider, but it's obviously your decision to estimate the differences in the cases. And it's not about evidence because, as mentioned before, this is not a tribunal. We are sharing the information with the parties concerned. But what we are assessing is the case of applying Article 7.4 and Article 3, which is the one that regulates trade in Appendix 1 species when they are not for commercial purposes. These are the two relevant articles of the treaty. And the fact that some of these facilities are for in situ breeding, and others are for ex situ breeding from species obtained from other regions and sometimes without complying with the CITES requirements. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, the Secretariat. So I've had a call from a vote from the representative for Kenya and for Kuwait, and so I'm going to proceed with that. And now we are referring to recommendation A in document 77, SC 77, doc 33.1. And for the committee members that agree with that recommendation, please raise your placards. And so I have Morocco, Madagascar, Kenya, Chad, Indonesia, Kuwait, Japan, Brazil, Honduras, Dominican Republic, and Oceania, which is being represented by New Zealand. And with simple majority, the committee adopts recommendation A. With that, we have concluded this agenda item, and we will move to the next item, which is agenda item 36, review of trade and specimens reported as produced in captivity. I give the floor to the Secretariat to introduce the document.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm speaking to document SC 77, Doc 36. The Standing Committee, together with the Animals Committee and in cooperation with the Secretariat, is directed to play a key role in the implementation of Resolution Conf 17.7, Rev Cop 19, on review of trade in animal specimens reported as produced in captivity. This resolution concerns trade in specimens traded under source codes C, D, F, and OR, as defined in paragraph 3 or of Resolution Conf 12.3 Rev Cop 19 on permits and certificates. So document SC 77 Doc 36 reports on the outcomes of the 74th and the 75th meetings of the Standing Committee concerning the 15 species country combinations which had been retained in the review process at the 71st meeting of the Standing Committee. And these cases are listed in the table in paragraph 4. In the present document, the Secretariat reports on actions taken by parties to implement recommendations made by the Animals Committee and Standing Committee in order to ensure compliance with the obligations of Article 4, paragraph 4 and 5 of the Convention for the 11 cases that were retained in the review of trade in animal specimens reported as produced in captivity following SC 74 and SC 75. In accordance with paragraph 2.0 of Resolution Conf 17.7 Rev Cop 19, the Secretariat consulted intersessionally with members of the Animals Committee on the relevant cases through the Chair to collect their views on whether the recommendations have been implemented. And the views of the Animals Committee members have been taken into consideration in the Secretariat's final determination. As per paragraph 2p of Resolution Conf 17.7 Rev Cop 19, the Secretariat is hereby informing the Standing Committee of its determination as to whether the recommendations of the Standing Committee have been implemented by the range state concerned. And Annex 1 to this document contains a summary update of the status of the 11 species country combinations under consideration. So based on the information in the table in Annex 1 to the present document, the Secretariat recommends that the following 8 species country combinations be removed from the review. That is Centrocellus sulcata and Varanus exanthematicus from Ghana, Kakatua alba from Indonesia, Vulpes zerda and Centrocella sulcata from Sudan, Giocciolone elegans from Jordan, and Testudo hermani from North Macedonia, while the species country combinations of Centrocella sulcata from Benin, Mali, and Togo should be retained. And these lists proposed for retention or removal are presented in paragraphs 17 and 18. Then, in accordance with paragraph 2Q of Resolution Conf 17.7, RevCop 19, and based on the present report and the table in Annex 1, the Standing Committee is invited to consider the recommendations of the Secretariat and decide on necessary action and make recommendations to the parties concerned. In paragraph 16 of the document concerning North Macedonia and the origin of the founder stock of Testudo hermani, the Secretariat reiterates its legal opinion that the provisions of CITES do not bind a current party in relation to any act or fact which took place or any situation which ceased to exist before the date of entry into force of the treaty with respect to that party. The Secretariat further notes that Resolution Conf 10.16 RevCop 19 on specimens of animal species bred in captivity requires that the competent government authorities of the exporting country must be satisfied that the breeding stock was established in a manner not detrimental to the survival of the species in the wild. However, the resolution does not provide any specific guidance on how a party that was not bound by the treaty at the time of the establishment of the captive breeding facility is expected to fulfill that requirement. And in this regard, the Standing Committee may wish to instruct the Secretariat to develop additional guidance for such situations and present it to the Standing Committee at its 78th meeting. The Standing Committee is also invited to note the new species country combinations that were selected for review at the 32nd meeting of the Animals Committee, which are indicated in paragraph 20. The Animals Committee also agreed to refer the contents of Table 7 in the annex to document AC32 Doc 15.1 to the Standing Committee for its consideration. And this table is presented in Annex 2 to the present document and concerns species country combinations that met Criterion 4, which concerns reporting inconsistencies between source codes, and Criterion 5, which concerns incorrect application of source codes. The Standing Committee is also invited to review the contents of the table in Annex 2 to this document and consider if any of these species country combinations should be selected for review under Resolution Conf 17.7 and request the Secretariat to address general or specific questions to the parties concerned. And finally, the Standing Committee is invited to note the progress made and the proposed way forward towards the implementation of decisions 19.63 to 19.65 as outlined in paragraph 24. And all of the tasks addressed to the Standing Committee at this meeting are found in paragraph 25. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. I now open the floor to members of the Standing Committee for comments. The United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry to go back to the previous point, but we sought the floor before we moved on, so apologies there. We would just like to include on the record our sincere disappointment that a compliance case has been brought by the Secretariat and supported by a majority of the Standing Committee without identifying a single specific case of non-compliance in the UK. Thank you. And sorry to disrupt from item 36.
The UK, we will note your comment. I give the floor to Poland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The EU and its member states agree with most recommendations by the Secretariat on the species country combinations under Recommendation A, but would like to comment on 6 specific species country combinations. For Centrochelis sulcata from Ghana, we welcome the progress made by Ghana towards implementing the recommendations. We noted that the first reported captive breeding occurred in 1995 as production of generation F1, and a first production of generation F2 was reported in year 2000, which is inconsistent with the known age at first maturity. Nevertheless, we don't generally doubt that Ghana is currently able to produce generation F2. We recommend that the size limit of 15 centimeters straight carapace length, which has been adopted, is published together with the quota on the CITES homepage to ensure its persistent and consistent use, as it was recommended by the Animals Committee. As the establishment of a marking system is an essential prerequisite for the efficiency of regular monitoring and inspections of the breeding facilities, to our understanding, Ghana has only reported to be working towards compliance with these recommendations. Therefore, in order to be confident with releasing the species country combination from the review, we recommend the publication of the size restriction of 15 centimeters straight carapace length, along with the export quota, and the implementation of a marking system. For Varanus exanthematicus from Ghana, we know that Ghana was not able to undertake an NDF yet due to inadequate financial resources and technical support, and the mentioned rapid assessment has not been shared so far. For 2023, Ghana published an export quota of 9,000 ranged specimens. This may result in a conservation-relevant offtake, which should not be done without an NDF. We welcome that Ghana has prepared a rapid assessment in the interim in order to allow sustainable quotas. However, without an opportunity to assess the results of the quick survey, it cannot be confirmed that the quotas are set at levels not detrimental to the species. Therefore, the species country combination should be retained in the review until sustainability of all trade in ranched and captive bred specimens is demonstrated by an NDF for specimens taken as juveniles or eggs, or for serving as breeding stocks, which has been approved by the Secretariat and the Chair of the Animals Committee. For Kakatua alba from Indonesia, we welcome the publication of INFDoc 32, which was uploaded yesterday and gives some more explanation on the reported high reproductive output from 2015. Taking into account this new information, we can agree that the facility might have been able to produce the numbers of offspring reported. Nevertheless, according to the described breeding methodology, on-site inspections might not have detected whether eggs or chickens harvested from the wild would have been used to boost the output of the facility, and such concerns have been the reason for selecting the species for the review process. The most reliable method to address such uncertainties would be a genetic parenthood test. The use of such test could drastically reduce the possibilities and incentive for wildlife laundering. In general, and taking into account this new information, we could agree with releasing the species country combination from the review if Indonesia confirms that it will not accept such unnaturally high reproductive output without further evidence. We suggest that in such cases, Indonesian authorities will perform a genetic parenthood test in the breeding operation to prevent wildlife laundering. The other comments are for Vulpes zerda and Centrochelis sulcata from Sudan. We agree to release the two species country combinations from the review with the understanding that specimens from the breeding facility will not be exported for commercial purposes without an NDF for the founder stock anymore. We need to stress an NDF would likewise be required in order to export wild specimens for commercial purposes, which is not subject of this process, but we noted that Sudan has exported wild specimens of the species for commercial purposes in the past. We wonder if the outcome of this process, namely that Sudan will stop exports of captive bred specimens for commercial purposes from the facility, will be readily available in the current way of official information to parties, also in the long term. There is a risk that this type of information might become cryptic. Therefore, we would like to ensure that this information remains easily accessible to parties. For Geohelone elegans from Jordan, as the legal acquisition of the breeding stock can currently not be proven, the release from the review process should depend on the confirmation that until all necessary evidence is available and has been reviewed by the Secretariat, international commercial trade in specimens of Geohelone elegans from the respective facility will not resume. To us, it remains unclear whether Jordan has only temporarily stopped the exports of Geohelone elegans. It is also unknown what happened with thousands of specimens in the facility and whether they are prevented from entering international trade. In conclusion, we can agree to release the species country combination from the review if it is ensured that trade from the facility will not resume. Here, we would like to stress the same concerns as for the species from Sudan, that this information will remain easily available for parties in the long term. As for recommendation B, we would like to stress the need for the Secretariat to develop guidance for situations where the founding stock was acquired before the party concerned joined the convention and report to 78th meeting of the Standing Committee, as this would be crucial for other species country combinations as well. And for this meeting, it is particularly relevant to Testudo hermanni from North Macedonia. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Poland. I give the floor next to Brazil.
Gracias.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. Brazil is speaking on behalf of Central, South America and the Caribbean. And we have a brief comment. We agree with the recommendations, and in terms of recommendation 25D, our region would request that there be a selection of a species country combination, Panthera onca jaguar with South Africa, because Panthera onca jaguar is a symbolic species of our region. It's in Brazil, and it's considered officially the symbol of biodiversity conservation. And so for us and our region, it's very important to obtain more information on trade in these species of felines that are noted as produced in captivity. We've just held a workshop in Brazil for range states of the species, and we have a great deal of interest in the subject, and we think the more information available, the more important it will be for our conservation policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I next give the floor to Morocco.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would also like to thank the Secretariat for this report on the review of species, of specimens produced in captivity, and looking at the proposals from the Secretariat. Paragraph 20 says that a certain number of countries were selected by the Animals Committee, and that includes Morocco for the species Chlamydiotis undulata, with species that have been in trade in the last 5 years. The criteria that justifies the selection of this species was the number of specimens exported from the country. Morocco received from the Secretariat a request for information on the subject and provided all the responses to the questions on this species, which is aimed for the conservation and reintroduction in its area, its range. And since then, we have worked on techniques, and we have brought together fundamental and applied research, and this responds completely to the criteria for a controlled environment in accordance with the necessary resolutions. And we have some specimens that are for reproducing the captive group, and some which are for release into the wild. The Centre works closely with the CITES Management Authority to issue all the necessary authorizations in the framework of national legislation. All cases are studied on a case-by-case basis before the issuance of CITES permits, and we are ready to provide any additional information, including a visit to the centre, and would like this combination to not be retained in this study. Thank you.
Thank you, Morocco. I give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. And our thanks to the Secretariat, UNEP WCMC, and the parties involved. A lot of work continues to go into progress this work, which we'd like to recognise. With regard to the updates and recommendations relating to cases already in the review process, we have several comments. On Centrocelis sulcata from Benin and Mali, we agree with the recommendation for this case to be retained in the review process, but would suggest a new deadline for reporting by Benin and Mali to be included. The 1st of March 2024 would allow AC33 to consider the response. SC78 should consider escalating this case to compliance proceedings if no response is received, given the threatened status of this species, and noting that significant trade has been reported in the last few years from both countries. In the interim, a voluntary export condition to export specimens only with a maximum carapace length of 15 centimeters would be proportionate and precautionary. On Centrocelis sulcata from Ghana, we support the intervention by the EU. On Centrocelis sulcata from Togo, we are grateful for Togo's responses on this case to date and acknowledge that they are receiving support through the Compliance Assistance Programme. But some key information is still missing. For instance, evidence of legal acquisition of the founder breeding stock and evidence that the specimens are being bred in accordance with Resolution 1016. And despite this, large volumes have been reported in trade. Therefore, similar to the species in Benin and Mali, we would recommend including a reporting deadline of the 1st of March 2024 for Togo to provide this missing information and for the Standing Committee to consider compliance proceedings if this information is not forthcoming. We would also support including a stated maximum carapace length of 15 centimeters alongside their published quota. On Varanus exanthematicus from Ghana, we support the intervention of the EU. On Kakatua alba from Indonesia, we support the removal of this case from the review process. And from our recent experience regulating and monitoring breeding operations using artificial insemination and egg pulling techniques, we would encourage Indonesia to consider developing a genetic test able to verify parentage claims. We would be happy to share our experience here with Indonesia. On Giacalone elegans from Jordan, we can support the removal of this case from the review process, given the only licensed breeder no longer holds this species. But to address the original concerns of the Animals Committee around legal acquisition of founder breeding stock, we would suggest this is conditional that exports of this species from Jordan do not restart without first informing the Secretariat and Chair of the Standing Committee. Given the high level of illegal trade of this species, we would be also interested to understand how the disposal of the stock held in the facility referred to in the report has been handled, if Jordan or the Secretariat have an update here. Thank you.
Thank you, the United Kingdom. I give the floor to Honduras.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just want to take into consideration the 22 specimens which are in South Africa of unknown origin. I think there is progress in genetics in some of the range states of jaguar where we could to see if they are of if they have proceeded from South America or Central America, and to see where they are. There are countries where we can carry out the analysis so that we can look at the populations. Thank you.
Thank you, Honduras. I give the floor to Kazakhstan.
Chair, with our short intervention, we would like to provide information about the Hubara Reproduction Center in Kazakhstan, which was built in 2008 in collaboration between Kazakhstan and the United Arab Emirates. The main objectives of the center is breeding and cultivation of the Hubara with its further release into the natural habitats. And the current production capacity is up to 15,000 individuals per year. At the beginning of the breeding program, much emphasis was placed on studying the behavior of particular Hubara population in order to create all necessary conditions for captive breeding. Captive breeding is the long and complex process that utilizes two groups of birds, individuals that will be released into the wild and individuals that will later become part of the breeding stock. A different breeding technologies is being developed for each group of birds. On the same time, for the period from 2008 to current 2023, around 50 57,500 individuals of the Asian Hubara bred in the center, and they were released into the wild to the Kazakhstan. The center currently employs around 360 staff. Most of them are local residents. And following this meeting and decision of the Standing Committee, Kazakhstan is ready to provide all data requested by the Animal Committee to complete the review. Thank you for giving me the floor.
Thank you, Kazakhstan. I'm going to close the list for comments. I have the UAE, Benin, and the USA. The UAE.
Thank you, Chair. The United Arab Emirates is collaboration with Morocco and Kazakhstan and proud to stand united in the conservation effort of the Hubara bastard species. By establishing a conservation breeding center under the management of the International Fund for Hubara Conservation. This center, which are special for the protection and recovering of the Hubara species, Hubara bastard species, exemplify the power of the international cooperation and wildlife conservation. Our collective effort underscore a shared commitment to not only breed these birds following international recommendation and regulation, but also to ensure that their successful introduction and sensibility population in the wild. It is imperative to acknowledge to the comprehensive of such a conservation program, which are not limited to breeding, but also encompass the habitat protection, research, and local community engagement. This program are designed with a single objective to score the certified and robustly of the Hubara bastard species cross its national rate. In conclusion, the UAE reiterated to the dedication to this partnership and overarching mission of the International Fund for Hubara Conservation. By working together, we are making process toward to the conservation and restriction of the enoch species. Thank you.
Thank you, Kazakhstan. I give the floor to Benin.
Okay. Okay, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would like to thank the Secretariat for this document. Benin would like there to be one correction, please. On June 1st, 2022, we replied to the Secretariat and we said that we had a 0 quota for Centrophelus utaka. This in anticipation of sending additional information, and in an email through email on the 3rd of June, we had an acknowledgement from the Secretariat that they had received our information. So the information on Benin is not correct, and we would be grateful if it could be corrected in the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Benin. The United States.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Speaking on behalf of the United States, with regard to recommendation A from the document, we would like to align ourselves with the comments from the representatives from the European region, with a couple of additions. With regard to Hippocampus comes from Vietnam, While we support removal of the species country combination from the review, we remind the party that if export of specimens recommences, it must make legal acquisition and non-detriment findings prior to authorizing export. With regard to the two suggestions with regard to Geocolone elegans from Jordan, we would be supportive of either approach suggested by the two members from Europe. One, to keep the species country combination in the review pending receipt of additional information, or remove them and then additionally seek further information on the status of the facilities for that species. With regard to Testudo hermani from North Macedonia, we do not support removal of the species country combination from the review before the additional guidance concerning the origin of founder stock is provided by the Secretariat. And that leads into recommendation B. We support the comments provided by the representative from Europe. And in addition, we would add that in developing the guidance called for in this recommendation, we support requesting the Secretariat to consult with experts on the matter, including from parties and other relevant bodies. We recommend that the guidance also address situations where an endemic species is subject to stricter domestic measures, including guidance on ensuring that founder stock has been sourced legally from range states, and how to document that founder stock was acquired before the relevant law went into effect or otherwise complied with the law. With regard to recommendation C, we support noting the new species country combinations selected for review by the Animals Committee at its 32nd meeting, and look forward to continuing those discussions at AC 33. With regard to recommendation D, concerning the species country combinations in the table in Annex 2 to the document, we support directing the Secretariat to contact the 6 parties concerned and to request clarification regarding the reporting inconsistencies and/or the incorrect application of source codes. In those cases where the exporting party assigned a different source code than the importing party, the exporting party should be requested to provide an explanation of the differing interpretation, which may require consultation with importing parties as well. And if the inconsistency is the result of an error, we suggest making changes as appropriate to their CITES annual reports. If the inconsistency results from a differing interpretation between the exporting and importing party, the exporting party should be requested to provide such information to the Secretariat for consideration by the Standing Committee at its 78th meeting. In those cases of apparent incorrect application of captive production source codes D for Appendix 1 species that have not been registered in accordance with Resolution Conf 1210, Rev Cop 15, the Secretariat should be requested to remind parties concerned of the provisions of that resolution. Concerning recommendation E, we would like to thank Switzerland for providing funding to support implementation of decisions 19.63 to 19.65. And we look forward to receiving the outcome of the Secretariat's work with UNEP WCMC to produce the comparative analysis called for therein. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, the United States. I would like to thank the interpreters for 5 more minutes while we attempt to wrap this up. I give the floor to the Secretariat.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The Secretary would just like to make a couple of comments here. Firstly, in relation to the cases that were referred by Morocco and Kazakhstan. So these are the cases that were selected at AC 32. We acknowledge that we have received responses to the letters that were sent out after AC 32, but these responses will all be presented and discussed at the next meeting of the Animals Committee in July. So yeah. Okay. Yeah, so we did not present them here. They will be presented to the next meeting of the Animals Committee. And then, I don't know, Chair, if you wanted to sum up, or we were going to make the suggestion of producing a COM-doc, because we've heard quite a few detailed recommendations and conditional recommendations here. So it would be appreciated if those who spoke, Poland on behalf of the EU, the UK and the US, I think were the ones that I noted who had made significant recommendations, and we will produce a COM document that will take on board all of that so everybody can see exactly what this new set of recommendations is, and we will bring that back into the plenary. I think that was it, wasn't it? No? Hang on. Yes, thank you. Thank you for the reminder. I knew there was 3 things I meant to say. So in relation to the table that's in Annex 2 and the selection of species country combinations, we heard a couple of parties requesting Panthera onca from South Africa, and then from the United States for all of the, for the Secretariat to write to all of the parties. I think there's 7 parties concerned on this table. So the Secretariat is happy to write those letters. So the Panthera onca would be included in that selection, and we will write using the asking the questions that the United States had proposed there for all of the cases that are on this, and report back to the next standing committee if there is anything that requires additional follow-up. So I hope that helps, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. Just to summarize to the committee, for recommendation A, we will invite the folks who have specific conditions on the removal of these species to submit them to the Secretariat to produce a COM-doc so the committee can see them in writing, and we'll take this back up later on in the agenda. For recommendation B, we were going to request the Secretary to develop guidance for situations where founder stock was acquired before the species was listed on CITES or before the party concerned joined the convention, and report out to SC 78, and for the Secretary to consider the comments made on the floor when developing that guidance. For recommendation C, yep, we agree on recommendation C as it's outlined in the document. For recommendation D, as the Secretariat has stated, the Secretariat will contact all of the parties listed in Annex 2 of document 36 and follow up with them and ask for further information regarding their source codes. And for recommendation E, we will just note the progress made and the proposed way forward on implementation of decision 16.33. With that, I conclude this agenda item and the session for the day.
Yes, there was one housekeeping with regard to the African group meeting tomorrow morning in room 14, I think, from memory. Can African group just confirm meeting from 8 to 9 tomorrow morning, room 14? Is that correct? Yes, that's correct. I see nodding. So African group meeting in room 14 tomorrow morning and subsequent mornings from 8 to 9. That's it from housekeeping.
We'll just pick back up with item 58.
We pick back up with item 58 tomorrow morning. Thank you.